We are back. Remembering Dynasty, bums, and a whole hell of a lot more with Peter Golenbock. I'm Ralph Tycho, and welcome back, Mr. Golenbock.
Well, thank you so much, Ralph.
Yeah, I'm getting these intros down where I'm not so much of a schmagegi anymore.
You're getting to be an old pro, Ralphie.
I'm getting to be old. No question about that. The time is marching on for we baby boomers. We original baby boomers, 1946. And
well, the Yankees are trading away all their relief pitchers. It's very strange.
They promised Andrew Miller. They told him, we will not trade you under any circumstances. So,
yeah, right. So they traded him to Cleveland.
So they right, just as promised.
That's right.
And I really did not think they'd give up on the season. I knew.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the Yankees have been here in St. Petersburg for the last 3 games, and they came into town, and the Rays actually played 3 really beautiful ball games, and looked like such a better team than the Yankees. It wasn't even funny. I mean, if Teixeira and A-Rod aren't through, I'll eat their contracts. I mean, they're toast. Teixeira's hitting 188. A-Rod is hitting 206. I think A-Rod struck out 3 times yesterday, struck out in the 9th today. He just doesn't look like he can see the ball anymore. And it's kind of a shame because he's got 696 home runs. And it would have been really wonderful had he been able to get his 700th. But watching him the way he's playing, I mean, maybe when he goes back to Yankee Stadium, he'll be better. But he looks like he's done, and I mean done. And then they've got guys like Carlos Beltran, who plays sort of, he's a star. There's no two ways about it. But he's 37, 38 years old. And you got other guys too.
You got to like their shortstop, D. Gregorius.
Well, their shortstop. I would trade any of the Rays pitchers right now for D.D. Gregorius. He's stunningly
really good.
He is just stunningly good. And Starlin, I love the name. If I ever have another child, I'm going to call him Starlin. What a great name.
Starlin Castro, right?
Starlin Castro. Fidel's younger cousin, Starlin.
Shows you how strong the Cubs are and how much of a system they have where they can.
You're jumping from the Yankees to the Cubs here. I was finishing off my diatribe about the Yankees and what a sad shape that these guys are in, and I guess their general manager kind of figured that out. Though I can't imagine, what Yankee Stadium is going to be like at the end of September. They've traded Chapman, who's just stunningly fantastic, to the Cubs, and traded Miller, who is equally good, to Cleveland, leaving him with, Betances, and God knows how they're going to get from the 5th inning to the 9th, because their starters are all, they're powerful, but they're terrible. It's the damnedest thing. We watch these guys, Ivan Nova, and the guy with all the vowels in his name, who throws 97 miles an hour but can't get anybody out. And today there was another guy, I mean, who looks like he should be a 15-game winner, but he's got an ERA of 6. So I don't know.
They just reacquired Clippard too for the Yankees.
Yes, all right. So now they have somebody who can pitch in the 8th. So now they got to get from the 5th to the 8th to get to Clippard to then get to Betances. I don't know. I'm not sure the brothers, the Steinbrenner brothers, know what the hell they're doing or what they want. They've got a couple of guys in there who are terrible second guessers, a couple of their executives who used to work for George, who just, made George crazy. And then you got their general manager who nobody's ever been sold. Cashman, nobody's ever been sold that he's a top guy. I mean, Epstein, yes, he's a top guy. I mean, Andrew Friedman, who went from the Rays to the Dodgers, proved himself to be a top guy when it came to trades. Matt Silverman, who's now working for the Rays, the school's still out because he's made a lot of really crappy deals. Wasn't
Cashman pretty well in entrenched in the Joe Torre?
Oh, he was tremendously entrenched. He was tremendously entrenched, and the reason he was entrenched because he was willing to take whatever grief poor Steinbrenner threw his way. I mean, Steinbrenner would do things like forbid him to go to the winter meetings. I mean, how goddamn stupid is that, to forbid your general manager to go to the winter meetings, for crying out loud? And he had a deal where George gave Cashman an iPod or whatever, a telephone, where he said to Cashman, I want you available 24/7. In other words, any day of the week and any hour of the week. I mean, he had this poor guy crazy. Of course, that was George's deal. I mean, George was like Donald Trump. The deal is you make everybody who works
all
for you
the way down the line, all the way back. Crazy, maniacal, spoiled, inheritors.
So Cashman got lucky because Steinbrenner died. On the other hand, the one thing Steinbrenner always did do was that he always had stars, in and around his, his players are all stars. The problem now is that they had stars, but now their stars are no longer stars, and they're making, A-Rod's making $25 million this year, and he's done, and he's due to make $25 million next year. And what the hell are they going to do? You're going to keep him on the roster where he's hitting, 200. Same thing with Teixeira. Teixeira's just terrible.
They'll probably end up buying these guys out.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But at the moment, they don't have anybody seemingly to replace them. That's the weird thing. Which is, I guess, why they made the trade of those two pitchers. I can imagine
how they've been getting some minor league talents. I don't know what they got today for Miller, but
they got talent. They got some talent. They got four guys. They got four players from Cleveland for Miller, including one guy.
Three or four for Chapman. Which really now, interestingly enough, one of the players they got for Chapman is one of the very, very tip-top infielders. Titularly a shortstop. Though I can't imagine 19-year-old kid.
Right. I can't imagine this guy is better than Gregorius. Though, they could always either move Gregorius to second or move the kid to second. They'd have a tremendous, infield combo.
Or move the kid to the outfield, and because you got Stalin at second right now too.
Well, I don't know enough about the kid to know. Some people are just infielders. You weren't going to take Alex Rodriguez and make him an outfielder. He was just a damn good shortstop, and the only reason he became a third baseman was that Jeter was playing shortstop, and Jeter was the captain, and he wasn't about to move.
Well,
the funny thing about A-Rod,
and they made him a pretty good outfielder, and I think the shortstop's the best athlete on the
you're talking about Mickey Mantle? Oh, Mickey Mantle couldn't hit the first baseman. That's why they made him an outfielder, for crying out loud.
But the talents transcend sometimes, and at 19,
but usually they make
5, 6 really good prospects. And you're almost giving up on a season that was given up on you. They were mediocre if they kept those guys. So I think knowing when to fold can't be a bad idea sometimes.
No, the only problem that the Yankees have is that they're the Yankees. And they're in Yankee Stadium where the seats next to the dugout are, $800 a game. And if your record is, way below 500 come the end of September, you're going to have 10,000 people in the stands. And the Yankees don't usually do that.
To those out there, you're not exaggerating by much. What is a seat by the dugout in Yankee Stadium?
It used to be 1,300. Certain seats. This stadium cost them $1 billion. The Yankees put up $500 million, and Rudy Giuliani put up the city's another $500 million, because George and Giuliani were asshole buddies. Right. And in the city that was starving, it was a starving that they had no money to help the homeless, or no money to pay the cops, or no money to pay the teachers. They sure as hell had enough money to build another Yankee Stadium that they didn't need.
And as if the Yankees couldn't take some money out of the media bundle that they have coming in. No teams nowadays with TV money and what have you are really doing badly financially. I think taking city money to do in this day and age is disgraceful. But,
it is, but that's just the way it is. I mean,
the only team that really beat out the Giants built themselves another stadium and financed it on their own and rejuvenated the downtown area, south of Market area in San Francisco. The stadium itself is a gem, and so sometimes
I think the fellow who owned the San Diego team, I think, did the same sort of thing. He built a beautiful, beautiful complex down there. He built hotels and restaurants in and around Petco Park, just absolutely beautifully. Then, of course, his wife divorced him and took all his money, and he had to sell the team, which was a shame.
That is a shame. Yeah. Let me ask you off the subject just a little bit. How does we were talking about the Tory dynasty that Cashman headed up as the GM?
Mm-hmm.
How does that dynasty? There's been so many of them since we're kids. The 53, the 49 to 53.
Not that many of them. Not that many of them. There was the dynasty, and then there was there was the little dynasty with Billy and in 76, 77, 78. And then there was the little dynasty that came 1999, 2002, with the fabulous group including Jeter and
now,
Williams.
How does that dynasty stack up? The one including Jeter and Williams and Posada and Rivera and and pitching Pettit and Clemens and
that's right.
How does that stack up against the other dynasties?
Against winning 8 pennants in 10 years? Not
well,
exactly.
Of course not. Yeah.
That one was. But and here's the but.
Even that was 2 dynasties in one on some level.
That's true. That's true. Right. See, what's really, really interesting, what people don't really, really understand, is that George Steinbrenner was an idiot. Okay? If left to his own devices, he never, ever in 30 years ever would have won a pennant. Because he was like Trump. He was the smartest person in the room, in his opinion, and he knew better than his managers, and he knew better than his general managers, and he knew better than the scouts, and he would do things that would absolutely submarine the Yankees' chances of winning year after year after year. He had 2 situations. Let me finish my thought. Then you can interrupt me. Let me finish. He had 2 serious times when he was suspended for life. The first time came during the Watergate scandal, where George had 8 of his employees give money under their own name personally after taking the money from George himself. So he got caught, and Bowie Kuhn suspended him for life, which we all knew wasn't going to be for life. And so he was out those 2 years, and during those 2 years, Gabe Paul, who really knew something about baseball players, made some magnificent trades, some of them with Cleveland, which is where Gabe came from. So he got people like, he got Greg Nettles from Cleveland. He got some wonderful pitching from Cleveland. He added Chris Chambliss, I believe, from Cleveland. I mean, he basically stole Cleveland blind while he was building the Yankees' little bitty dynasty there. And he did it because George Steinbrenner had no say, and Gabe Paul did. And Gabe Paul built that team. So by the time George came back, Guidry and the rest of those boys, really, 76, 77, 78, they were spectacular. They won championships in 77, 78, and with that same bunch, they also won a pennant in 81. Okay, so then George took over again, and the team went in the toilet again, and it wasn't until Dave Winfield made
foundation.
Well, more than that. He made a contract with George that said that Winfield was to get a cost of living raise every year. Never mind the fact that his contract was for millions and millions and millions of dollars. But George didn't realize that that clause was in the contract. And one of the writers, and I think he was from the New York Times, wrote this whole article how Dave Winfield had hoodwinked George Steinbrenner into this fabulous contract. And George, being the narcissist that he is, like Trump, can't take criticism. And so what he decided to do is make Winfield's life miserable. Winfield, of course, being the wonderful person that he was, didn't take any of it. First, George tried belittling him. And then Winfield said, "You can say anything you want about me, I don't care." So George then said he was going to trade him. And what happened then, of course, was that Winfield said, "But I have a no-trade contract, trade clause in my contract. You can't trade me." So by this time, George was climbing the absolute friggin' wall. So what to do?
Oh.
What to do? He found a guy by the name of Howie Spira. And Howie Spira used to work for for Dave Winfield's foundation. Or I think he still was working for his foundation at the time. And apparently Winfield was doing things like, spending money on himself. It wasn't as Simon pure as you might have thought it might be. So Spira said to George Steinbrenner, "If you give me $100,000, I'll tell you every nasty little thing that I know about the Dave Winfield Foundation." So George gave him 40. And Spira spilled the beans. And then, of course, Spira, being the scumbag that he was, came back and he said, "I want my other 60. And at which point George went to the press, which is bizarre, of course, because here's George, because he didn't want to have to pay him the other 60.
But
so
he calls in tell him that he's doing that. He's storing information to not
right. But here's the thing. He has a friend in Tampa who's an FBI agent. So he calls his FBI agent, and they have Spira arrested for extortion. And I do believe Spira did go to jail for extortion. But at the same time, Fay Vincent found out what George was up to. And so Fay Vincent could not, leave this thing alone, and he suspended George Steinbrenner for life again. And again, a second time, it was really only for 2 years. And during those 2 years, Stick Michael was in charge. Now, if anybody knows the game of baseball, by God, it's Stick Michael. And he had all those young kids. George, at the time he was suspended, wanted to trade Mariano Rivera away. Rivera was a starting pitcher at the time, and George didn't like him and was going to trade him. He had Jeter, who he was talking about trading. He had Bernie Williams, who he didn't like because he thought he was gay. He had Andy Pettit, who he wasn't thrilled about because he was a kid. And there was one other in that group, the catcher, Jorge Posada, who he was about to trade as well because he was a kid. And then he got suspended.
My God, those guys are literally the basis.
Right. Well, the core four they were called.
Core.
Though they were really a core five. And because George was suspended for those 2 years, those guys got their foot in the door. And they showed what wonderful players they were. So by the time George got back, he wasn't about to trade them because they were fan favorites by then. And they won. And they won a whole bunch of pennants and World Series, and they were fabulous.
Whoa.
And so George is going to go into the Hall of Fame. Of course, he will. He was the most important personality. The same way Trump today is probably the most important personality in this country. Be that as it may. George Steinbrenner in baseball was the most important person in baseball for 30 years because he had this penchant for getting his name in the paper, be it for firing Billy Martin 5 times or any other manager 20 other times, or firing his general manager, or firing the guy who was his PR guy, or firing the janitor in the bathroom, or his secretary for not bringing him a tuna fish sandwich. And that was the deal. You got to read about George Steinbrenner in the paper every day. But
I started to say that Seinfeld, that parody,
Seinfeld
satire.
saved him. Seinfeld saved him. I wrote this wonderful book. It's wonderful because I enjoyed doing it. Called George. It's about the big mouth who's something or other. I don't know. It's all about. I went. It took me 20 years to write this thing. Back in the 80s, I interviewed all of George's high school friends at Carver. What the hell was the name? Carvel? No, but he's some military academy in Indiana where he went to.
Okay.
Culver Academy it was. Culver Academy he went. And then he went to Williams. I interviewed about 12 people who went to Williams with him, and it was fascinating. You know, George would write articles about himself in the newspaper. You know, none of what he wrote about was true, but he would write about it. He gave himself awards in the newspaper.
You told me something.
Like Melania's
something
speech.
that I tried to pass on about him.
Yeah.
In a previous interview.
Tell him to read the book,
him
George.
Borrowing the money.
Oh yeah.
Well, tell that story again. I tried to recall it for somebody just what a scumbag this guy was, and this story made me drop my jaw. I knew he was somewhat imperfect, but this story, tell it one more time.
Okay. Jim Stouffer was the fellow's name. Jim Stouffer, you know Stouffer Foods?
Yes.
Stouffer's father was a big deal. And when George was in his early 30s, he and Stouffer and about 9 or 10 other fairly wealthy guys bought the Cleveland Pipers basketball team.
Right.
And it was interesting because they had the first African-American coach. And he had great plans. His plan was to take this team, which was in the Industrial League, and take it into the NBA. And he came so incredibly close. He even had Jerry Lucas signed to a contract. And he was going to take Lucas and the rest of his players to the NBA. The only problem is that he needed a certain amount of money, a certain amount of cash to get into the NBA, and he had about 3 nickels to rub together. Because his father, who was unbelievably wealthy, refused to give him a nickel. And that's why he didn't get into the NBA. But during this whole thing, what he did one time was that he took a Jim Stouffer check from Jim Stouffer's checkbook, and he forged it for $25,000.
Takes it out, takes it off his desk.
Yeah. And he filled it out for $25,000, and Stouffer's father was fit to be tied. Absolutely fit to be tied. But you know, George's father's wealthy, so he got his money back, and nobody knew about this. But the interesting thing was, I mean, it had meaning. And the reason it had meaning, because later on, this was in 1971 or 72, George Steinbrenner wanted to buy the Cleveland Indians. And who owned the Cleveland Indians? Jim Stouffer's father.
Oh, so that was
when he went and said, I want to buy the Indians, Stouffer said, over my dead body. And so Steinbrenner then hooked up with Gabe Paul, and what did they do with a bunch of other rich guys? They bought the New York Yankees for $10 million, of which Steinbrenner put up almost nothing. Almost none of that money was his money. But he bought this team for $10 million, and he, by himself, and you got to give the guy the credit, took this team and made it a billion-dollar enterprise. And he later on, he started the Yes Network, and the Yes Network, the Sun sold to somebody for $1 billion. Whoa. So, you know, say what you want about George, you know, not being able to put a winning team on the field and being, you know, totally insane when it came to, you know, treating people badly. So you know, like Trump, who apparently does have $1 billion somehow with all the buildings he's built, managed to succeed financially through hook or by crook, and too often, of course, it's crook.
Okay, there has been rumors that Steinbrenner has shown humanity in other ways that he's money.
Yes, and that was the last chapter of my George book. When he moved to Tampa, He moved out of there because the people in Cleveland were going to kill him because he closed down. He was in the shipbuilding business, and he closed down the shipyards in Ohio and put thousands of people out of work. And it wasn't entirely his fault. It wasn't entirely his fault. The Japanese had gotten a stranglehold on the business, and they could build boats so much cheaper than we could here in America. And so he didn't really have very much choice. And so he moved to Tampa with the notion that he was going to take American ship and somehow do something with it in Tampa. Though quite frankly, he didn't do anything with it at all, and it eventually went out of business. But what he did do from Tampa is build the Yankees into this very valuable commodity. And if you talk to the people in Tampa, he was tremendous when it came to charities.
Okay.
He gave
That's
to
what
this
I mean.
he gave to this organization for the families of killed policemen and firemen, which became a really big deal. He gave $100,000 a year to the Tampa Bay Orchestra. He gave a lot of money to the ballet. He did an awful lot of things, to the extent that there is now in Tampa a Steinbrenner High School.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steinbrenner High School.
So that says some positive things about the man.
No question about it. And you were talking about the Seinfeld show, which is so marvelous, because somebody from the Yankee organization was feeding the Seinfeld people little tidbits about George. Because
Really?
Yeah, because I had some quality informants myself. For instance, George ate the same thing every single day for lunch. Same thing. And if you remember the calzone incident on
right.
Seinfeld.
Right.
One day,
the guy wouldn't sell George calzone because he was a smart ass or something.
Something like that. So he had Kramer. He had Kramer go and get the calzone, and it was raining or something. Some crazy thing happened, and Kramer couldn't do it. And of course, George went crazy because he didn't have his calzone. But there was truth to that. That George Steinbrenner every day had the same thing. It wasn't a calzone; it was something else. But he always had the same thing every day. Also, there was a fella who used to come to the Yankee Stadium. He was an executive, and he would always be there first. In other words, I don't care what time you came in, this guy was already there. And from that, they built this fabulous deal where George Costanza built a bed under his desk, if you remember.
I think
and
I
slept there. It was so hilarious. So friggin' hilarious. I mean, so many things were hilarious where George Steinbrenner thinks that Costanza's dead. So he flies down to Boca Vista to George Costanza's parents and visits his parents to tell him that George is dead. And George's father proceeds to go off on this rant. And I wish I could remember the name of the player. Steinbrenner had traded some fabulous outfielder that everybody loved.
Jay Buhner,
thank you. And George Costanza's father goes off on this rant. Now, Steinbrenner's come in to say, your son is dead. And the response to that is, how could you have traded Jay Buhner? I mean,
that's beautiful.
It's so priceless. It's unbelievably funny.
Greatest television show on so many different levels.
So many levels. But what was interesting about it is it made George Steinbrenner likable. You know, that character was likable because he was so goofy, but people liked him. And so it really softened his image of being the, horrid son of a bitch that he really was.
Right. I'm thinking back to the woman who played George's mother on that show.
Oh, yes.
Oh, God.
Estelle.
She played in Funny Girl. She was
She did.
She was a line actress or a chorus woman.
I can't remember her last name. Her first name was Estelle.
Yes, yes. Yes.
That's her real name. That was her real name.
And they would match up. Reminds me of that comedy duo that that George's father
Nichols
was.
and May? I mean, who are you talking
Yeah, no, it wasn't Nichols and May. It was what's his last name? And I'll tell you. She recently passed away, but they were very funny together. They God, what's George's father's last name on the show in life?
Yes. And his son is a very well-known actor too.
Right.
Yeah.
Whose name we would remember.
Yes, whose name neither of us can think of right now. I know.
Right, but that doesn't matter because
I want you to know, I spent 2 hours today trying to think of the name of Nicole Wallace. We were sitting at breakfast at brunch today talking about the people on MSNBC, and I was saying that there's this Republican who really is knowledgeable and who's really been very, very interesting during the last 2 weeks. And she's blonde, and she's, good-looking gal, and her name is, and the way I come up with these things is I go through the alphabet. Alice, Eddie, Barbara, Carol. But, of course, her name was Nicole. The only other Nicole I know is Nicole Simpson, unfortunately.
Well, there is Nicole Kidman, who's not
that's right.
all that.
Nicole Kidman, very good. But I couldn't come up with it. And so I'm going through the alphabet now on George Costanza's father and son, Ben Stiller. I just did it.
And
Ben
her
Stiller.
And Elaine
Stiller and Mira. Stiller and Mira. There
Mira.
you go.
And they were good. They played.
They were wonderful.
Good radio comedy. Good on records. Dry stuff. And you mentioned Elaine May and Mike Nichols.
Yeah.
My son, the doctor. Do you remember that?
My son, the doctor. Yes, of course.
My son, the nurse. He says, "Mama, I'm going into the medical industry, and I'm making you proud." And this is way before gender.
Oh, I know it.
Yeah. She says, "Oh, you don't know how proud it makes your father and I to know that we can say, 'My son, the nurse.'" And in those days, that was so funny. I mean, I was the house.
It's funny in these days. Yeah.
It is, but not in the sense that you're used to having women do things that women didn't do. Men doing, like I was the stay-at-home dad for all those years, and my mother hated that, the idea that I was, and she'd joke about that. My son, the stay-at-home mom. But it's a different world. All right, let me get on with some of the things that I jotted down to ask you today. We talked a little bit about the fact you never did a giant book, and
no, they wouldn't. I was frustrated from not being able to do that because Barnes and Noble put all the local bookstores, all those little mom and pop bookstores out of business, and once that happened, Barnes & Noble would only put 2 or 3 books in each store, whereas the local bookstores might put 200 books in a store.
Right.
And you'd have a book
the one
signing.
thing it deprived me of knowing more about is Monty, and we talked about him a little bit. You were friends with him.
I know.
The more I
go to my book In the Country of Brooklyn, and one of the chapters is with Monty, and that's a wonderful discussion that I had with him, where he actually was.
Would you agree that he was as close to being musical in terms of class, and nobody ever said anything bad about Monty Irvin?
He's one of these people like John Hope Franklin, the historian, who was just this totally wonderful person, or Buck O'Neill. He was very much like Buck O'Neill. I mean, he smiled and he loved people, and he was felt sorry for people like Willie Mays because he was so bitter, that sort of thing. I mean, you would have wanted Monty Irvin to be your best friend. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. And the thing that I discovered was that Branch Rickey had asked him to be the number one guy before he asked Jackie. And he was so, and Monty was so sort of reticent that he almost reluctantly was telling me that he had been asked first, and that he turned him down because he had been so maligned by Southern cracker white officers in the Army during World War II that he couldn't imagine having to go through what Jackie Robinson went through. And so he said no. He said, I'm not ready. And this was in 46, and he didn't start playing ball in the major leagues until 49.
Yeah,
so it took
by that
3
time
years.
he was in his late 20s, if not early 30s.
Well, Jackie started at 28, and it's not like they were hiring 21-year-olds.
Yeah, absolutely.
When Cleveland took on Satchel Paige, Satch was in his 40s. I think he was 42, something like that, when he first started.
Yeah, and those
Satchel led him to a pennant in 48, which is amazing. Amazing. Just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was Bill Veeck. Another person you did not. You have a league, I think it's good, where your team is the Bill Veeck.
Yes, but Bill and my buddy Ed Lynn had written such wonderful books that there was nothing, more that I would have gotten out of him. I mean,
when you
Ed
read
Lynn
those
did it
books
so
early on, we're the same age, and books like Veeck as in Wreck.
Veeck as in Wreck, yeah. And
right.
And one load short of a something.
If that influenced you a lot,
Nah. There's only one book that influenced me. Only one book that influenced me, aside from books like Hawaii. When I was 13 years old, I picked up Hawaii and started reading this thing at Camp Winawaki.
Yes.
James Michener. And I'm sitting there, I got it out of the camp library, and I'm sitting there during rest hour, reading this thing, and I was absolutely, totally enthralled. So you begin reading, I began reading writers like that. There were a raft of them. Norman Mailer.
Did you read Updike and Philip Roth and those guys?
Oh yeah. Not Updike so much. Philip Roth I did. Leon Uris was somebody I loved, and my favorite who wrote. I'm trying to think of her name. It was also about a camp, believe it or not, but he had written other books as well. Winds of War? Who's the guy who wrote Winds of War? I actually wrote to him. He was my favorite writer, and I used to read his books and copy paragraphs because I wanted to write the way he wrote. I would do that. And then the other thing that happened to me, when I was 13 years old, I discovered a book called The New York Yankees by Frank Graham. There was a whole series of team biographies.
I kind of remember that. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm reading The New York Yankees by Frank Graham, and he has conversations with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, and he talks about Joe DiMaggio. And I must have read that book, I don't know, 6 or 7 times in my teens. And so when I went to work for Prentice Hall after graduating law school, this was 1972, the New York Yankees by Frank Graham, the last year of its publication was 1948. So I went to see the editor of the trade book division, and I said to him, look, the New York Yankees won, in 16 years, they won, 14 pennants from 1949 to 1964, and I'd like to write an important book about that era. And he didn't know me from Adam, but the amazing thing was that he was as big a Yankee fan as I was. He gave me a contract.
Oh, wow.
And that's how, if he had been a Tiger fan, who the hell knows what I would have done with the rest of my life. But I then spent the next 3 years of my life writing Dynasty.
And being paid to have done it. So,
and being paid to have done it. Yeah.
Yeah, you weren't writing it on the come. You were.
No.
Yeah.
So I must say, I got paid $10,000 for 3 years' work. I suspect I was making probably 38 cents an hour.
But you were doing other things at the same time
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, I was. I had a hotel business there for a little while until I had a wonderful idea to put students in this particular hotel, and I was so successful that every other hotel started taking students too. So within 3 years, I was pretty well broke. But by that time, I was able to finish writing Dynasty, and then I got a job working for the Bergen Record as a reporter. Not sports.
Okay, tell me something. Like you wrote Dynasty. When somebody buys a book, like at Amazon or whatever, to this day, you still get bucks. I'm asking.
Let me tell you something. Dynasty, the 1964, was a long time ago. And yes, 47 people want to read about it today. But when I wrote it in 1975, it was 9 years before. I had a huge audience.
Right.
I mean, that book was so successful, it was unbelievable because it was current. A lot of those people were still in the game.
So you made more money than the $10,000 they paid you up front, is all.
Oh, heavens, yes.
Oh, good.
Sure.
Good.
Sure, but more than that. I mean, what it did for me is it gave me credibility with the Yankee ball players. So, for instance, while I was working at the Bergen Record, I get a telephone call, and it's Billy Martin. And the guy loved so much about what I wrote about him in Dynasty, he wanted me to write his autobiography. And so, having written Billy's, and everybody, the great players loved Billy, so I got to write Sparky Lyle's book, and I got to write Greg Nettles' book, and I got to write Ron Guidry's book. Not bad.
Yeah. I didn't know you wrote Ron Guidry's book.
Yeah. Very cleverly entitled Guidry.
Louisiana Lightning.
Yes, he was.
Tell me something about him that I might not know.
Well, what you don't know is that the guy could lift. He could deadlift 500 pounds. He looked like this little shrimpy guy, but he was absolutely as strong as an ox. And I spent a week with him down in Lafayette, Louisiana, and his mother, for instance, made crawfish étouffée and really spiced crawfish, and we sucked on the heads, and steam came out of your ears. It was just so much fun. We had such a good time. A very sweet guy. Very sweet, uncomplicated guy.
He befriended Yogi at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody wrote a lovely book about the two of them. It's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, Yogi, of course, I had the opportunity to interview, and he was special. He was absolutely special. He was a really, really lovable, decent person. He really was. I have a friend now who's writing a biography of Yogi Berra. John Pessa is writing this biography.
Was Garagiola and Yogi as close as reputed?
Well, they were close when they were growing up. They grew up together.
Right.
And it's
but
interesting
in later
because
life,
the Cardinals, they didn't spend a lot of time together. I mean, it's certainly possible. Well, I don't know. I mean, Yogi lived in this mansion in New Jersey. Garagiola lived in St. Louis. I mean, Garagiola was with the Cardinals all those years, and he worked for NBC. I mean, they were close friends. You got two friends who then, go in different directions. I'm sure they were still close friends for the rest of their lives. They didn't see each other much. But it's interesting. I went to the Hill where the two of them grew up, and there was, somebody in Gragiola's house sitting there. These two, sort of lower middle class neighborhoods, and the Cardinals gave Garagiola $500. And so when both the Cardinals and the St. Louis Browns came to see Yogi, he wanted $500. And these morons of both teams wouldn't give it to him. And that's how the Yankees got him.
Wow.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. Sometimes you make mistakes, and sometimes you make huge mistakes. And that was a game-changing mistake. Yogi was one of the 3 or 4 best catchers that ever lived. You look at his numbers.
What would you say if you had to pick one? Whom would you pick? If I pronounce it.
I'd pick either of them. I'd take either of them. They were both wonderful people, wonderful catchers. Campanella just. I mean, you couldn't have a finer person than Campanella. He was fabulous. And what happened to him was so awful.
Tragic, yes.
January, he had a liquor store, and he was driving home from his liquor store, and he didn't navigate a curve, and his car turned over, and he was paralyzed from the neck down, not the waist down, the neck down for the rest of his life. And I had the privilege somewhere in the 80s. They did an evening honoring Campy in Las Vegas, and the guy who held it asked me to speak. I was the speaker for the evening, and it was a wonderful honor, and Campy just sat there beaming. I went and I read his autobiography and other, I just told people what a totally wonderful person he was. A very gentle man. I think he grew chickens when he was a kid, and he couldn't stand it, if anybody killed the chickens. He was just, a gentle man, but a fabulous, incredible ball player.
Yeah, mixed race. He was Italian and African American.
He was that.
Yeah.
But in this country,
there's
no. Yeah, but Jeter was 1990s. In 1948, there was no mixed race. If you were, 1% black, you were an N-word in this country.
Right. And a lot of times you took a lot of prejudice from fellow blacks. Yeah, expressions like high yeller and this, that, and the other thing. So it's just like Jews, Litvaks and Glitzianos. There's always going to be factions of
That's
craziness.
true. Those damn Litvaks.
Yeah. I know. My
I know it.
grandfather went to the grave saying that, so don't laugh. Or the other way around, we didn't know. We could have been a Litvak, we could have been a Glitziana. Would it matter? Wer weiß.
Right.
Let me see if I have one more question that I don't want to hang up and go, why didn't I ask that? Oh, we'll get into Tony Curtis another time. That's too
another time. Yes.
That's not
yes,
just
it's
a
now.
throwaway
It's
thing.
now on my coast. It's now 9:20, and it's time for me to get some water and a little bit of ice cream maybe, and hit the TV with my
Thank you,
lovely
Peter.
wife.
I appreciate it.
Lovely wife.
Usual.
My lovely wife.
And I hope the best candidate wins, as you know, and I certainly at this point hope it's Hillary Clinton, so that
otherwise you're going to get Mussolini.
Well,
I mean, all these people who are talking about voting for the Green for the Green Party, are you people crazy? Anyhow,
but there's an awful lot of dissatisfied Bernie brothers, and
you can be as dissatisfied as you want. You're dissatisfied as you want. You want unsafe at any speed, which gave us George W. Bush. You want that? If those people want that, fine. I don't.
Well, I didn't want status quo either. I will take, again, the lesser of two evils.
There's no evil about it. There's no lesser of two. You're getting me started. Don't do that.
I know.
There's no evil about it. She is a wonderful woman, a fabulous candidate, and she's going to make a brilliant president.
Believe me, I'm in the same boat. I'm an American.
Okay, so don't give me this lesser of two evils crap. There's no evil about it.
Okay.
She's a fantastic candidate.
Just putting your record.
I know. I understand, Ralph. Bad choice of words.
The evil part is a bad choice of words. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. The lesser.
I will agree to that.
The lesser, or something. Okay, I understand what you're saying. Let's wish your listeners a good night, shall we?
That
good night,
would be
listeners.
best, and we'll talk next week. And maybe we
good night, Ralphie.
And maybe we could finally at that time get Lenny.
Lenny's good. Lenny's good. And this is not, by the way, Lenny Dykstra. This is Lenny Randall.
Right, exactly.
Just so your people don't understand, this is Lenny.
No, I wouldn't.
No.
I wouldn't put him on. To be honest with you,
Lenny's in the same category with Trump right now.
And in my mind, he definitely is. This is not a good person. Let's just
not a good
that way.
Let's put it that way.
That's the best thing we can say.
But
not so Lenny Randall.
No.
Leonardo, call the show. We ask you every week to call the show, Leonardo. Okay.
All right. Bye.
Next week. See you, Peter.